The photograph slid across the table before anyone said a word. Seo Yan didn't look at the hiring manager when she pushed it. She was examining her nails, perfectly shaped, the color of dried blood. And when she finally spoke, her voice carried the particular kind of calm that belongs to people who have never had to raise it to be heard. "I need a translator for a sensitive case." She tilted her head slightly. "Female, foreign, educated but not positioned. Someone my husband would never look at twice." The hiring manager, Mr. Park, picked up the photograph. A woman photographed outside a Seoul subway entrance, mid-stride, blazer the color of burgundy wine, bag over one shoulder. The expression on her face was the expression of someone who knows exactly where they are going and has calculated how long it will take to get there. A Nigerian, late 20s, the name typed underneath in clean font, Cynthia Uzo. "She's been with the firm 3 years, Mr. Park said. "Excellent reviews. I've read her file." Seo Yeon was already standing, already pulling on her coat with the unhurried efficiency of a woman who has never waited for anyone. "Her visa renewal is in 4 months. She has a penalty clause on her student loan if she leaves Korean employment before the 5-year mark. She has no family here, no local financial cushion, and a reputation she's built entirely on professional discretion." She buttoned the coat. 1 button, 2. "She's perfect. She has too much to lose to cause trouble." She picked up her bag. "I want her assigned by Monday." She walked out. The door closed behind her with a soft, final click. "Mr." Ma Park sat alone with the photograph for a long moment. Then he opened his diary and reached for his pen. 3 floors up and across the city, Cynthia Uzo was at her desk translating a commercial contract, eating a late lunch she'd forgotten to taste, completely unaware that her life had just been arranged around her like furniture in a room she hadn't walked into yet. If this story already has you, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Welcome to Afro-Korean Stories TV. Subscribe if you believe that connection doesn't need permission. Drop a comment and tell us, have you ever felt seen by a complete stranger? Now stay close. We're just getting started. The case file arrived on her desk on a Tuesday, slipped under a stack of pending contracts by someone who clearly hadn't thought it deserved ceremony. Cynthia noticed it the way she noticed everything, quietly, without announcement, the way a person who has spent years being underestimated learns to observe. She cleared the stack, opened the file. High-profile divorce, Sun Hyung versus Seo Yeon, combined marital assets in the upper tier. 1 child, female, age 10, currently residing with the mother. Case in early mediation. The firm was representing the husband. Cynthia's role: provide Korean English interpretation during all joint sessions, maintain strict professional neutrality, document all translated exchanges for the record, and remain at all times an invisible conduit between 2 parties. Invisible conduit. She had seen that phrase in briefing notes before, and it had never bothered her. She had spent enough time in this city being invisible that it had stopped feeling like an insult and started feeling like a particular kind of power. Invisible people hear everything. Invisible people are in the room when the real things get said. She read the file twice, made 3 notes on her legal pad, clipped everything back together and put it in her work bag. Clean. Professional. She had done this before. She told herself this was simply another case. She told herself this the same way she had told herself at 23 that Seoul was simply another city, with the same careful, deliberate firmness that was less conviction and more a decision not to be afraid. The first session was scheduled for Thursday morning at 9. Cynthia arrived at 8:52. She arranged her notepad, uncapped her pen, set her recording device on the table with the precision of someone who understands that her credibility lives entirely in documentation, and waited. Mr. Cho, the lead attorney, walked in at 8:58, flanked by 2 associates who each carried folders they would open and close repeatedly throughout the session to look busy. He nodded at Cynthia without looking at her directly. She was used to that. She nodded back. Then the door opened again, and something changed in the room. Not loudly, not with announcement. There was no shift in temperature, no dramatic pause. but the room changed the way a room changes when someone who carries genuine, unperformed stillness walks into it. Like the air rearranged itself around a new center of gravity. Son Hung. He was early 40s, not tall in a way that demanded acknowledgement, but present in a way that made height irrelevant. He wore a dark suit with no tie, no watch that announced itself, no cologne that preceded him. Nothing about his appearance asked for attention, and nothing about his presence allowed you to withhold it. He moved to his seat at the far end of the conference table without scanning the room first, which was what most people did when they entered unfamiliar spaces, that quick animal inventory of exits and threats. He simply sat, like the room was already his and had been for some time. Then he looked up, and he looked at Cynthia. Not through her the way most people did in these rooms, not past her, not around her, at her, a single, direct, unhurried look, the kind that said, "I see that you're here. I want you to know that I know that." Cynthia looked down at her notepad. She wrote the date, the case number, the session number, pressed the pen a little harder than necessary. SEO Yan arrived 3 minutes later. Cynthia would come to understand over the sessions that followed that Seo Yan was never late the way people are late when they lose track of time. She was late the way generals are late to meetings they called, precisely, deliberately, by exactly the amount of time required to communicate that she was the axis around which the room rotated. She wore ivory. Her posture was a studied art form. She set her bag down on the chair beside her attorney, and then, briefly, she looked at Cynthia. The way you look at a chair, processing the presence, finding it unremarkable, moving on. Cynthia noted it, filed it, said nothing. The session began. For the first 40 minutes, Cynthia translated with the clean efficiency she had spent years perfecting. Mr. Cho asked questions about the timeline of marital breakdown. SEO Yeon's attorney, a precise woman named Ms. Yim, pushed back on the framing. Cynthia rendered everything in both directions, Korean to English for the records, English back for clarification, without inflection, without interpretation beyond the linguistic, without a single syllable that was hers rather than theirs. Then Sun Hung spoke, low, almost to himself, a sentence that came out quietly, almost accidentally, the way things come out when you've been holding them too long and your grip finally slips. Mr. Cho didn't even write it down. Cynthia translated it without looking up. He says he is exhausted. Her voice dipped on the last word. Slightly, almost nothing. The way a tuning fork vibrates when you strike something close to its frequency. Seo Yan didn't notice. The attorneys didn't notice. Sun Hung noticed. He looked at her again. Not the same look as before. Something different this time, something with more weight in it. As if he had just discovered that the room contained something he hadn't accounted for. Cynthia kept her eyes on her notepad. The session continued for another 20 minutes, and she was flawless for all of it. The hallway afterward. Cynthia was gathering her materials with the quick, practiced efficiency of someone whose next meeting was already calculated into her afternoon. Notepad in bag. Recorder checked and off, pen capped. She was already running through the MAPO contract she needed to finish before 5. "You translated that wrong." She stopped, turned. Zi Sun Hyung stood 4 feet away, hands in his pockets, expression even. He spoke English with the clean precision of someone who learned it formally and then lived inside it long enough for it to become natural. Nobody had told her he spoke English. She made a note of that. "Excuse me?" she said. "I said I was tired. Piganai hada. You translated it as exhausted." He was not confrontational. He was precise, the way she was precise, and she recognized it. They're not the same word. They're not the same feeling. Cynthia held his gaze without adjusting her expression. In the context of that sentence, with the specific conjugation you used and the register of your voice when you delivered it, the Korean distinction between tired and exhausted collapses in English translation. Exhausted carried the weight of what you said more accurately than tired would have. He was quiet. "You translated my tone. Language is more than vocabulary. Tone is data. I translated all of it." Something shifted in his face. Not a smile exactly, but the architecture of one, the way a building looks different at the moment before the lights come on inside it. "Is that always how you work?" he asked. "It's the only way I know how." He nodded once, looked at her for one more moment with that same unhurried attention. Then he turned and walked away down the corridor, hands still in his pockets, unhurried. Cynthia stood in the hallway for 4 seconds longer than was necessary. She counted them. Then she turned and walked to the elevator and told herself, with complete conviction, that this was a professional exchange about translation methodology and nothing more. She was very good at telling herself things. 3 more sessions followed over the next 2 weeks, each scheduled for 90 minutes and running over. The case was more complex than the initial file suggested. Asset structures across multiple holding companies, a property dispute with international dimensions, a custody arrangement that neither party had actually articulated but both were clearly maneuvering toward. Cynthia had handled more complicated cases, but she had not handled one that asked her, session by session, to translate the specific frequencies of 2 people dismantling something they had once built together. She began to notice things she had no professional reason to notice. The way Sun Hung never raised his voice, not once. There's not when Seo Yeon's attorney used language clearly designed to provoke a reaction that could then be entered into the record as evidence of temperament. Not when a document was introduced that he clearly hadn't expected. He would go still instead, a particular quality of stillness, like a held breath, and then make a single quiet correction that dismantled the provocation entirely without feeding it. She noticed the way he sat forward slightly when something was being misrepresented, a movement so small that only someone watching carefully would catch it, followed by a brief glance at Cynthia, as if checking whether she had caught the misrepresentation too. She always had. She never signaled it back. But something in the room between them was conducting a second conversation, running parallel to the official one, and she could feel it operating whether she wanted it to or not. She told herself it was professional attentiveness. She put it in a box, labeled it, set it on the highest shelf in her mind, and told herself it would stay there. On the Wednesday of the second week, she arrived at the conference room 6 minutes early and found a piece of paper folded in half on her chair. No envelope, no name on the outside. She looked around the empty room and then sat down and opened it. One sentence in English in handwriting that was careful and angular and contained. "Do you always translate what people mean or just what they say?" She read it twice, felt something open in her chest like a window in a room that has been closed too long, and then she firmly closed it again. She folded the paper, put it in the interior pocket of her bag, where she kept things she wasn't ready to make decisions about, sat down, arranged her materials. When the attorneys filed in 10 minutes later, she was completely composed. She did not respond to the note. She thought about it for 5 days. Seo Yeon's approach came after the 3rd session, in the corridor near the elevator bank, and Cynthia recognized the choreography of it even as it was happening. The way Seo Yeon had timed her exit to intercept, the shift in her manner from the conference room's careful hostility to something warmer and more deliberate. She touched Cynthia's arm lightly. Her hand was cool and her grip was brief, and somehow both things felt calculated. "I want to tell you something," Seo Yeon said in English that was accented but precise. "You're doing a wonderful job on this case. I mean that genuinely. Oh, I requested you specifically. I've been watching your work at this firm for several months, and I think you're exceptional." Cynthia smiled the professional smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Seo. I'm just doing my job." More than that, Seo Yeon's eyes were direct and warm, which was a combination Cynthia had encountered before in people who had learned that warmth and directness together create an impression of sincerity that is very difficult to question. "After this case is settled, and it will be settled, these things always are, I intend to recommend you for international cases, high-profile ones, the kind of assignments that don't come to people at your stage of career unless someone with influence opens the door." "That's very generous." "It isn't generosity, it's recognition." Seo Yeon tilted her head slightly. So you deserve to be in rooms that match your ability. I'd like to help put you there. The elevator arrived. Sao Yeon stepped in with a small, warm smile, and the doors closed. Cynthia stood in the corridor alone. She waited for the next elevator and wrote it down by herself, turning the conversation over with the methodical attention she gave to documents that seemed straightforward, but contained language she wasn't sure she trusted. It wasn't gratitude she felt. It was the particular unease of a door opening that you didn't knock on, in a hallway you didn't know you were in. She filed it, did not open it, not yet. The personal request came on a Friday afternoon at the end of the 3rd week, in a moment she was using for something else entirely. Cynthia was crossing the building lobby, coat buttoned, bag over her shoulder, already inside the Mapo contract in her head. She didn't hear him approach. Cynthia. She turned. Sun Hung was standing a careful distance back, far enough that she didn't startle, close enough that the conversation was private. He was holding a piece of paper folded in thirds, the way you hold something you are not sure you have the right to be carrying. He looked, for the first time since she had met him, uncertain. Not diminished by it, just human in a way the conference room hadn't allowed for. "I'm sorry to stop you," he said. "This is outside the case. You don't owe me anything here. You can say no and I'll understand, and it won't affect anything professional." She waited. "My daughter wrote me a letter," he said. He extended the paper carefully. In English. "She's been studying it for 2 years. She practices with her tutor every week, and she's very proud of how far she's come. She wanted to write to me in it." He paused. "I understand most of it. My English is functional but not nuanced. There's one paragraph in the middle that I've read 6 times, and I understand the words individually, but I'm not sure I'm feeling it correctly. I don't want to respond to the feeling I think she means, and discover later that I responded to the wrong thing." Cynthia looked at his face for a long moment. Then she held out her hand. He gave her the letter. She unfolded it, standing in the middle of the lobby, the building moving around them. She found the paragraph, read it once to herself, then again, then a 3rd time slowly, because some things require that. A 10-year-old girl. Writing in English she had worked hard to learn, with 2 spelling errors that had survived because someone who loves her had not corrected them. Asking her father, in the careful, circling language of a child who is trying very hard to be adult, about something that frightens her, whether living separately applied to daughters, whether the distance being created in court documents was the kind of distance that only went between her parents, or the kind that could spread. Cynthia's voice was completely steady. "She's asking if you're still her father after this is over," she said. "Not legally, she understands that part. She's asking whether the emotional fact of you changes, whether the distance between you and her mother is a distance that stays between the 2 of you, or whether she becomes part of what you're moving away from." Sun Hung had gone completely still. "She says," Cynthia continued, choosing each word with the precision the letter deserved, "that she understands adults have problems she cannot fix, and she doesn't expect to fix this one. But she wants you to understand that she has never had a problem with you, not once, and she needs to know you know that." The lobby kept moving. People came and went around them, indifferent and efficient. He stood in the middle of all of it like something the current couldn't move. "Can you say the last part again?" His voice was completely controlled, completely level. Only his eyes were not. "She has never had a problem with you," Cynthia said slower. "Not once, and she needs to know you know that." He nodded. "Once." He took the letter back from her hands and folded it along its original creases with the same careful hands he had used to give it to her. He stood there for another moment. Then he said, quietly and with complete sincerity, "Thank you." 2 words, but they landed with the weight of everything he couldn't say in a conference room. He walked to the exit. She watched him go until the revolving door completed its cycle and he was through it and on the street and gone. Something had shifted between them in that lobby, permanently, irreversibly. Both of them knew it. Neither of them acknowledged it. Neither of them, at that particular moment, could afford to. That night, Cynthia stood at the window of her apartment in Mapogu with a glass of water she had poured 45 minutes ago and not touched. The Han River lay below the city like a dark ribbon. She turned this over now with the same clarity she brought to all hard things. She didn't soften it or dress it up in professional language or pretend it was something less than what it was. She was developing feelings for a man who was in the middle of a divorce case that she had been employed to translate. A man whose estranged wife had personally selected her for this assignment. A man whose marriage was fracturing in front of her piece by piece, 3 times a week. And she was the person in the room whose job it was to render all of it faithfully into another language without being moved by any of it. She was being moved by it. She named this to herself with the same clinical precision she would bring to naming a problem in a contract. Not to accept it, not to act on it. But because she had learned early that unnamed things have more power over you than named ones. You can build a wall around something you can see. You cannot wall off something you are pretending isn't there. Then she set it aside. Deliberately. Firmly. She had a career she had built from nothing. In a city where she had arrived 4 years ago, knowing 3 people and owing a debt she was still paying down. She had a visa that required continuous employment at an accredited firm. She had a reputation built entirely on the word professional, spoken by people who might easily replace it with the word inappropriate if she gave them reason to. She had a life, careful and constructed and real and entirely dependent on her remaining exactly who she had presented herself to be in every room she had ever walked into. But she was not going to burn it down for a feeling. She emptied the glass of water into the sink, changed into pajamas, got into bed with a book she'd been reading for 3 weeks and had not advanced past page 60. She read the same paragraph 4 times without processing it. Set the book face down on the nightstand, lay in the dark, thought about the lobby, thought about his voice saying thank you in a way that meant something more complicated than gratitude, did not sleep for a long time. Ji Young from HR came to her desk on a Monday morning and asked if she could close the door. She sat down in the visitor's chair instead of standing, the way she normally did for quick updates. Cynthia saved her document and turned. When Ji Young's face was doing something careful, the expression of someone who has been carrying information they weren't sure what to do with and have finally decided the carrying is worse than the sharing. "Did you know," Ji Young said, "that Seo Yan specifically requested you for this case? Not as a preference, as a condition. She went through 6 translator profiles that we submitted to her review committee, and she rejected every single one. Different reasons for each. Not the right language background, not enough experience with legal mediation, too recently hired. She had a reason for all of them." Ji Young folded her hands on her knee. "And then she asked for your file specifically." Cynthia kept her expression neutral. "How do you know this?" "Because I processed the intake paperwork for the case assignment. There's a client preference form and hers was 3 pages long. She didn't just list your professional qualifications." Ji Young paused. She listed your personal circumstances, your visa status and renewal date, your employment contract terms, including the penalty clause, the fact that you have no immediate family in Korea, no spouse, no domestic financial ties, the fact that your scholarship required you to maintain employment in the legal sector for 5 years and you're in year 4. A pause. She knew all of it. She submitted it as reasoning. The office was very quiet. "There's more," Ji Young said, and her voice dropped slightly. One of the intake coordinators remembered a specific phrase from a phone conversation with Seo Yan when the assignment was being finalized. Ji Young looked at Cynthia directly. "She said, she's perfect because she has too much to lose to cause trouble." Cynthia did not move. She did not adjust her expression or shift in her chair or reach for her coffee. She sat exactly as she had been sitting. "I thought you should know," Ji Young said. She stood, hesitated with her hand on the back of the chair. "I don't know what it means in terms of the case, but I thought you deserved to know how you ended up in it." She left. The door closed. Cynthia sat at her desk for a long time, long enough that the afternoon light shifted in the window behind her computer. long enough that 2 colleagues walked past and didn't notice she wasn't working because she was sitting with the stillness of someone who is working very hard on something invisible. She had walked into this case believing she was unremarkable. She had spent weeks operating under the assumption that her foreignness, her background, her careful professionalism had made her a non-variable in the room. A function, not a person, which was how she had learned to survive in spaces that weren't built with her in mind. She had believed she was invisible. She had not been invisible. She had been studied. She had been profiled. She had been selected, not despite her vulnerabilities, but because of them, each one catalogued and weighed and found useful. Seo Yan had not hired her in spite of knowing everything. She had hired her because of everything. Every pressure point, every precarity, every reason Cynthia had to keep her head down and her behavior clean and her feelings completely and permanently out of the work. She was not the translator in this case. She was a controlled variable. A calculated risk that was supposed to be no risk at all. Cynthia opened her desk drawer, took out the folded note she had been carrying since the Wednesday of the second week, unfolded it. Do you always translate what people mean or just what they say? She looked at it for a long time. Then she folded it back up, put it in her drawer, and closed it. Something had changed. Not loudly, not with drama, but quietly and completely, the way ground shifts before you can feel it. By the time you notice, the change has already happened. We are right in the middle of it now. Drop a comment. What do you think Cynthia should do? Subscribe to Afro-Korean Stories TV if you haven't already. Let's keep going. She was still professional in the sessions. She was always professional, but she watched differently now. She watched the architecture of the room instead of just its surface. The way Seo Yeon chose specific Korean phrases she knew would not translate cleanly, creating ambiguity in the record that she could later interpret to her advantage. The way she deployed warmth like a tactical resource, turning it on and off at intervals that served her case rather than her character. The way she occasionally looked at Cynthia with an expression that lasted less than a second, a look that said, "You are exactly where I placed you and you will remain there," and then moved on. Cynthia translated everything accurately. She had never done anything else, and she wasn't about to start. But she understood the room differently now. She understood that she had been standing in a constructed space, and that the person who constructed it had done so with her specific dimensions in mind. That understanding had weight. She carried it home after every session and set it down in her apartment, and then picked it up again in the morning and carried it back in. Sun Hung found her in the lobby again on a different Thursday. The weather had shifted, early spring making its first hesitant arguments against winter, the air still cold but containing faintly the suggestion of something else. He waited until the lobby had thinned to approach her. She noticed him waiting. She pretended not to. "Cynthia." She turned. He was standing at a professional distance, hands in his coat pockets, and he looked at her with the directness she had come to recognize as simply how he looked at things. Without deflection, without the performance of casualness that most people used to make directness seem less like what it was. "I'd like to have dinner with you," he said. "Not in any professional capacity, not to discuss the case or anything related to it. I want to have a conversation with a person who is not paid by either side of this thing to manage my experience of it." He paused. "I realize that's a strange request." Cynthia looked at him. The lobby moved around them. "I can't do that," she said. "I know. It would compromise my position on the case." "I know that too." He nodded once. "I thought I'd ask anyway." He turned to leave. "Mr. Sun." She didn't know why she said it. It came out before the decision to say it had fully formed, which was unlike her. Everything she said was usually formed before it came out. He turned back. She looked at him. She didn't know what she had intended to follow his name with. She stood there for one moment in which she was aware of everything, the lobby, the light, the distance between them, the particular quality of his attention, and then she said the only true thing she could say that didn't cost her anything. "Good night." "Good night," he said, and something in the way he said it made it sound like more than a parting. He left. She stood there. Then she went home and made dinner and ate half of it standing over the sink and washed her dishes and stood at the window for 40 minutes and went to bed. She thought about the dinner invitation for 4 days. She thought about it with the careful, prosecutorial attention she gave to things she was trying to rule against. She built the case: professional risk, ethical ambiguity, a visa status that could not survive a scandal, a reputation that was her only real capital in this city. Then she texted Ji Young and asked her casually what the actual HR policy was on social contact between translators and case participants. Ji Young, who was very thorough, sent back 3 paragraphs that essentially said it was discouraged but not prohibited, that the standard was neutrality of conduct and appearance, and that a single social engagement in a public setting with no case-related discussion would be unlikely to constitute a violation. Cynthia read this twice. Then she sent a message to the number that had texted her 3 weeks ago from Son Hung's phone. Not dinner, coffee, public place, 1 hour. She arrived first. She always arrived first. She chose a table at the back of a coffee shop in Hongdae, busy enough that they were anonymous in it, small enough that the ambient sound created a kind of privacy. She ordered black coffee, checked her phone, put it away, checked it again, put it away. He arrived 3 minutes after the agreed time. He was slightly out of breath, which she had not expected. It humanized him in a way the conference room had not. That slight breathlessness, the evidence that he had been moving quickly to not be late. He ordered black coffee without looking at the menu and sat across from her. And for a moment they simply looked at each other across the small table in the way that people do when they have been speaking to each other in controlled, professional contexts for weeks, and suddenly there is no agenda, no notepad, no third parties managing the record of the exchange, just 2 people in a coffee shop in Hongdae on a Thursday evening. "You didn't have to come," he said. "I know. Why did you?" She wrapped both hands around her cup. It was too hot to drink, but she held it anyway. "I'm still working that out." He almost smiled. She had noticed before that he almost smiled more than he actually smiled, and that the almost version was more interesting than the full one would have been. It contained more information. "That's the most honest thing anyone has said to me in 3 months," he said. You should be around better people." "I'm working on it." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, because she had decided before she came, that if they were going to do this, she was going to do it honestly or not at all. "Tell me about your daughter." He lit up. Not visibly, not the way people light up in performances of happiness, but something in him became less contained, the way a room becomes less formal when someone opens a window. He talked about Ha-eun the way a man who loves something talks about it without needing to announce the love, just showing it plainly through specific details. She was 10. She had her mother's stubbornness, deployed with terrifying precision. She had recently become interested in architecture because she had told him seriously. Most buildings were designed by people who didn't think about what happened inside the rooms, and she intended to fix this. "She said that?" Cynthia leaned forward slightly. "That they don't think about what happens inside?" "Exactly that. She was very specific about it. She said rooms should make sense to the people who have to live in them." He looked at his cup. "I don't know where she gets these things." "From you," Cynthia said. And then, because it was true, and she had never been particularly good at leaving true things inside when they wanted to come out, "She gets it from you." He looked at her. She had not intended to say it with that much warmth in it, but it had arrived with warmth, and there it was. He talked about the marriage with the same plainness he brought to everything. No performance of pain. No bitterness that asked to be validated. He said it didn't end in a fight. It ended in silence. A silence that accumulated slowly over years, the way sediment accumulates in still water, until one day you look at the person across the breakfast table and realize you have been living beside a stranger for longer than you lived beside a partner, and neither of you noticed because the stranger was comfortable, and comfort is easy to mistake for something more. "The hardest part," he said, "is that there's no one to blame. You can construct a legal case, but you can't build a case against silence. Silence doesn't leave evidence. Cynthia thought about this, about the conference room, about translated sentences, about all the things people said in rooms and all the things they didn't say, and how sometimes the thing that wasn't said was the loudest thing in the room. "No," she said, "but you can leave it." He looked at her with something she couldn't name and didn't try to. "Yes," he said quietly, "you can leave it." They talked for 2 hours. She talked about Lagos, the version of it that existed inside her at a cellular level, the specific light of late afternoons, the particular brand of noise that was so different from Seoul's noise that she had spent her first year here feeling like she was living inside a translation of herself. She talked about what it costs to build a life in a city that wasn't built around you. He listened the way he did everything, with complete, undivided, unhurried attention that felt like a form of respect she hadn't realized she'd been missing. The coffee shop warmed around them. Outside, Hongdae continued its Thursday night business. Inside, 2 hours compressed into what felt like 20 minutes. She became aware of it all at once. The time, the warmth of the room, the fact that she had been leaning forward for the last 40 minutes, the fact that she had not once thought about the case file or her visa, or the MAPO contract, or any of the careful infrastructure of her life. She sat back. "Sun Hung," she said. The name came out before she had decided to say it. Not Mr. Sun, not Sir. His name, unguarded in her voice, crossing the distance between them without permission. She heard it arrive. She saw him hear it. The name landed in the space between them like something that had always been moving toward this table and had finally completed its journey. Neither of them pretended nothing had happened. "I should go," she said. "Okay." Neither of them moved for a moment. Then she stood and gathered her coat and her bag, and she left without looking back because she didn't need to. She could feel his attention on her all the way across the room and through the door and out into the Hongdae night, where the cold air hit her face and she stood on the pavement for a moment before she started walking, her heart doing something loud and inconvenient that she was going to have to address seriously when she got home. She addressed it for 3 hours and resolved nothing. Someone had seen them. Cynthia discovered this not immediately but 3 days later, which meant 3 days of sessions and translated sentences and careful professional distance, while something beneath the surface of everything was slowly rearranging itself. On the 3rd day, she was watching the room the way she always watched rooms now, and Seo Yeon received a message during the session break. Cynthia watched her read it from across the conference table. Nothing changed in Seo Yeon's face. Cynthia had been watching Seo Yeon's face for weeks. She knew its architecture. She knew the micro-expressions it allowed and the ones it controlled. She knew that Seo Yeon's face changed, with irritation, with calculation, with the specific cold pleasure of a strategic advantage, in ways that were small, but real. She had never seen it produce a complete absence of expression. Until now. Nothing changing was how Seo Yeon's face looked when everything had just changed. Cynthia filed the observation, kept translating, said nothing. She didn't have to wait long. Mr. Bay called her in the next morning. He was standing when she arrived, which he never did. He came around from behind his desk and gestured at the chairs in front of it, which meant the conversation was happening on equal ground, which meant the conversation was going to be hard. "Sit down, Cynthia." She sat. He sat. He put his hands together on his knee and looked at her with the expression of a man who respects someone and is about to disappoint them. "A formal complaint has been submitted to the firm," he said. "Alleged conflict of interest between you and one of the principals in the Sun Seo case." Cynthia felt something in her chest go absolutely still. She breathed through it. "What specifically is being alleged?" "That you met privately with Sun Hyung outside the firm premises, Thursday the 14th, a coffee shop in Hongdae, 2 hours. He watched her face. "Is this accurate?" "We had coffee," she said. Her voice was completely even. "I was not acting in any professional capacity related to the case. We did not discuss the case or the mediation or any related matter. The conversation was personal. It was one occasion. Cynthia. His voice was careful and not unkind. I believe you. I want you to understand that I believe you entirely. But what you're describing, a private social meeting between our neutral interpreter and one party in an active contested divorce proceeding. I'm a translator, not a mediator, not an attorney, not a neutral officer of the court. I'm a contracted language service. You're the person in that room whose neutrality both parties are depending on for the integrity of the record. He leaned forward slightly. The complaint has been filed by Sao Yan's legal team. It's formal. It goes on record regardless of the outcome. And the optics... He stopped. I may need to remove you from the case. Cynthia sat straight, did not argue, did not offer more explanation. She had learned in years of being the most qualified person in rooms that were not built for her, that additional argument from a position of reduced power almost always makes the position worse. I understand, she said. Thank you for telling me directly. She stood, shook his hand, walked out, down the corridor, past her colleagues who were on their phones and laptops and not watching her, to her desk. She sat down in her chair and placed her hands flat on the desk in front of her. Her hands were completely steady. Everything else was not. Her job was not gone. Not yet. But it was standing at the edge of a precipice, and the person who had engineered the situation that put it there had known from the beginning exactly where that precipice was, had chosen her specifically because the drop was high enough to be a credible threat. She thought about the photograph sliding across the table. She thought about a 3-page intake form. She thought about too much to lose to cause trouble. She thought about a coffee shop in Hongdae and a name said without permission. Sun Hung found out 2 hours later. He arrived at the firm's reception desk at 4:17 with the specific, aim-contained energy of a man who has made a decision and is not going to be talked out of it. I need to speak with Mr. Cho, he said. Now, not at his next available. Now. Mr. Cho's office had a view of the street and a wall of case files and a desk that was expensive without being ostentatious, which was the kind of thing Mr. Cho cared about. Sun Hung sat across from him with his hands flat on the table and did not look at the view or the case files or the desk. I want to settle, he said. Today, full terms, whatever Sao Yan's team has on the table, I'll sign it. Mr. Cho stared at him, then said carefully, Sun Zi, this case is on a trajectory to trial. Our position on the asset division is strong. The property portfolio valuation... I don't care about the property portfolio. You should care about it. Your interests in the, settle it. His voice was quiet, completely level. The kind of level that is not absence of feeling but such complete mastery of it that it produces the same surface. Whatever she wants. Full terms. I want the paperwork drafted today and signed this week. Mr. Cho was quiet for a moment. He was a lawyer who had been doing this for 22 years and had processed enough human wreckage to know the difference between a man who was folding under pressure and a man who had made a genuine, irreversible decision about what he valued. Can you tell me why? Sun Hung looked back at him. Because I don't want anyone else to be pulled into the middle of something that was already finished before any of this started. He paused. The current interpreter assignment, the complaint that was filed this morning. I want it made moot, today. Mr. Cho held his gaze for a long moment, then he reached for his phone. I'll contact opposing counsel, he said. Cynthia heard about it from Ji Young, who had heard it from a junior associate who had been in the building when the call went out. The message was 3 lines. She read it at her desk with her coffee going cold beside her keyboard. Sun Hung has instructed a full settlement, all terms accepted. Mediation concludes. She read it twice, set her phone down, looked at the wall in front of her. She understood with complete clarity what he had done. The case ending made the complaint moot. No active neutral assignment meant no neutrality to have compromised. There was no longer a conflict to investigate. Her position at the firm was unthreatened. Her contract was intact. Her visa was safe. The life she had built here, piece by careful piece, was safe. He had handed all of it back to her, at cost to himself, and without asking her for anything and without asking her permission. He had forfeited a favorable trial position. He had settled terms that his attorney had just told him were suboptimal. He had done it for a woman he had shared coffee with once. She sat with the full weight of that. Relief was not what moved through her, not primarily. Relief was there, but it was quiet and small beside the other thing, which was larger and more complicated and had no clean name. It was the feeling of being seen completely, not the professional surface, not the careful, competent facade she had constructed over 4 years, but seen. The vulnerabilities and the precarity and the visa clause and all of it seen, and someone acting on her behalf anyway, being protected without being diminished, mattering to someone who had every structural reason to protect only himself. She pressed her hands flat on her desk, breathed out. Then she heard footsteps stop outside the conference room at the end of the corridor and looked up. Seo Yan came alone, no attorney, no assistant, no coat arranged for a departure. She wore the same ivory she had worn to the first session, and she moved through the empty conference room doorway with the posture of a woman who has decided to stop performing for an audience. She sat down across from Cynthia without asking and folded her hands on the table in front of her and looked at her in the direct, undeflected way that she almost never looked at anyone. Silence. Long enough to be intentional. "I picked you," Seo Yeon said, "because I was certain you had too much to lose." Cynthia held her gaze. "You were right. I do. And yet. Outside the conference room window, Seoul moved through its early evening with complete indifference to what was happening in this room. The light had gone gold. "I saw it in the first session," Seo Yeon said. Her voice had changed in a way that was almost unsettling after weeks of hearing it perform. The performance was gone. What was underneath it was tired in a real way, human in a real way, and somehow more formidable for it. The way he looked at you when you translated his tone. I sat across that table and I watched him look at you like that. She paused. I haven't seen him look at anything with that kind of attention in 6 years. I thought I had buried it in him. I thought I had been the thing that buried it. Cynthia said nothing. I'm not angry at you, Seo Yeon said. She looked at the table briefly. When she looked back up, her face was still composed, but there was something raw in the composition. I want to be. It would be so much simpler. A clear thing to feel about a clear situation. She shook her head slightly. But I engineered the situation. I chose you because I thought foreign meant harmless. Because I thought a woman with your particular profile would be controllable. I thought I could put you in a room with my husband and the risk would be 0 because I had calculated everything. A pause. I missed the variable that can't be calculated. I always do. Mrs. Seo, I don't need anything from you, she said. Not harshly, just clearly. I'm not here to negotiate or accuse or ask you for anything. I came because I thought you deserved to know that you were never the problem in this room. She stood, smoothed her jacket. The composure settled back into place like a garment she had worn so long it had shaped itself to her body. She moved to the door. Then she stopped with her hand on the frame, and she didn't turn around, and her voice came from the doorway facing out into the corridor. He has not been genuinely happy in a very long time. I know this because I was there for all of it, and I chose not to address it because addressing it would have required me to change something about myself I wasn't willing to change. I chose comfort over truth, and I chose it year after year until there was no truth left to go back to. A pause. I wasted the chance. I wasted it deliberately, and I lived with that, and I made my peace with it. She was quiet for a moment. Don't waste yours. Whatever it costs, don't waste it. She walked out. Cynthia sat alone in the empty conference room with the city's evening light coming through the window and Seo Yeon's words sitting in the room around her like the residue of something that had been burning for a long time and had finally, quietly, gone out. The elevator, 6:15. She was leaving. He was leaving. They arrived at the elevator bank from opposite ends of the corridor at exactly the same moment and stopped and looked at each other across the few feet between them. And it was the kind of coincidence that only reads as coincidence if you decide to read it that way. They stood side by side. The elevator display above them tracked its descent from the 12th floor. The corridor was empty. "I heard about the settlement," Cynthia said. "I know. You didn't have to do that." "I know." She looked at the display. 8, 7. "I have things I need to protect. My job, my visa, everything I've built here. I need you to understand that those things are real." "They are real." His voice was even. "I'm not asking you to stop protecting them. I never asked you to trade anything." "Then what are you asking?" The elevator chimed. The doors opened. Neither of them moved. "Nothing," he said. "I'm not asking for anything. I just didn't want what happened to you this week to have been because of me." She stood there for a moment with the open elevator behind her and his words in front of her and the full accumulated weight of the last several weeks pressing on her chest like a hand. "I called you by your name," she said. "In the coffee shop. I didn't say Mr. Sun. I said Sun Hung." "I know." She turned and looked at him. "I meant to." He looked back at her. And the almost smile that she had watched form and retreat for weeks arrived fully for the first time. Slow, quiet, containing everything it had held back. It asked nothing. It said everything. "I know," he said. The elevator doors began to close. She put her hand out and stopped them. She looked at him one more second. Then she tilted her head toward the open elevator, a small, real, unperformed invitation. He stepped in. She stepped in. The doors closed behind them. The complaint was formally withdrawn 6 days after the settlement. No active case, no neutral assignment, no conflict of interest to investigate. The firm's internal review concluded with no findings. Mr. Bay called Cynthia into his office and told her the matter was closed and that she was, he wanted to say this clearly, an exceptional professional whose record at this firm was without blemish. "Thank you," she said. She shook his hand. She went back to her desk. She opened her next case file. Life continued. It looked from the outside much the same as it had before. She translated. She attended briefings and sessions and post-session reviews. She was precise and professional and thorough in every room she occupied. She went home in the evenings. She stood at the window over the Han River sometimes, which she had always done, and thought about things. But she stood there differently. Not waiting, not bracing, not calculating what she could afford to want, just standing, just looking, just being fully present in the life she had built in this city, which was hers in a way it had not entirely been before. Because she had stopped moving through it like someone who was still in the process of proving she had the right to be there. She had the right. She had always had the right. She had simply needed to stop asking for permission and start walking like it. 3 weeks later, she was sitting in a case briefing for a commercial dispute. 2 corporations, a French interpreter sharing the table with her, and a lead attorney outlining a complex asset timeline. When her phone buzzed under the table, she left it. The attorney kept outlining. It buzzed again. She glanced down. A message from a number she had not yet saved in her contacts because she had been taking her time about it. "My daughter wants to write you a letter. She asked me this morning. She said the woman who explained her words to me should know that they worked, that I sat with her last weekend and I told her, clearly and directly and without qualification, that distance between me and her mother will never become distance between me and her. That the arithmetic of this doesn't reduce her, that she doesn't need to ask again. Not ever, because the answer is settled." She cried, then she asked me to contact the translator and say thank you. I would like to say thank you also. Bar for the letter, for the lobby, for the coffee shop, for saying my name. Cynthia read it once. She read it again. She placed the phone face down on the conference table and looked up at the attorney, who was still speaking, and at the French interpreter beside her, who was making notes, and at the room around her, which was going on in the ordinary and complete way rooms do when they have no idea what just happened in the one palm-sized space within them. She was smiling. Not the professional smile she had spent years calibrating for rooms like this one. Not the social smile she deployed in corridors and elevators and small talk. The real one, private, full, belonging entirely to her. The one she reserved for things that arrived without warning and landed somewhere beneath all the careful layers she had spent years building up. She tilted her face down slightly so the table wouldn't see it. But it was there. Real. Hers. Unmanaged. She let it stay. The last morning. A soul spring was happening. Not gently. Soul didn't do anything gently, but suddenly, overnight, in the way decisions happen once they've been made, completely, without asking anyone's permission. Cherry blossoms had appeared on the trees along the river road like a judgment. The air still carried cold, but it was cold that was losing the argument. Cynthia Uzo walked toward the glass doors of Park and Shinlaw Associates with her bag over her shoulder and her blazer buttoned and her footsteps even on the pavement. The city moved around her the way it always did. Noise and motion and the particular soul energy that had taken her a year to stop reading as chaos and start reading as rhythm. She did not stop outside the doors. She did not stand on the pavement and exhale first, steadying herself for the room she was about to enter. She did not inventory her vulnerabilities or calculate her risks or remind herself of everything she could not afford to lose. She pushed through, nodded to the security desk, pressed the elevator button, stood in the ascending car with her reflection in the polished metal doors, burgundy blazer, straight back, expression ready, and recognized the woman looking back at her without the slight discomfort she had once felt doing so. She knew who she was in this city now, not the person who had arrived 4 years ago calculating whether she had the right to take up space. Not the invisible conduit, not the controlled variable, not the woman with too much to lose. She was Cynthia Uzo. She had built this life from the ground up, in a language not her first, in a city not her birthplace, in rooms not originally designed with her in mind. She had been studied and measured and slotted into a role that was supposed to neutralize her. And she had stood in the middle of it all, done her job with complete integrity, felt what she felt without apology, and come out the other side with everything she had built. And something she hadn't planned for. Seo Yeon had chosen her because she thought forgiveness meant expendable. Seo Yeon had been wrong about that from the very first session. Cynthia Uzo had never been the safe choice. She had always been the most dangerous person in that conference room, not because she sought to be, not because she needed anyone to know it, but because she was the only person at that table who truly heard everything, every word, every tone, every silence, everything that was said and everything that was held back and all the space in between where the real meaning lived. She understood all of it, in both languages, in every silence, in the spaces where nobody else was listening. The elevator doors opened on the 8th floor. She walked out. She began. If Cynthia held you, like this video and subscribe to Afro-Korean Stories TV. Drop a comment. Was she the most dangerous person in that room from the very first session? We read every single one. See you in the next story.